Philippines, a free country?
Philippines is a small country found in Southeast Asia. Made up of 7,107 islands, this country is known for its rich and fresh natural resources. The population of the Philippines is around 98,734,798 and still counting. Filipinos back then have built their own civilization, with their leader called the Datu, communities called barangays, and servants called Alipin. They have their own ways to improve their economy through agriculture, boat making, weapon making, and many more. They traded their products not only to the different islands in the Philippines, but also to different parts of the world. In 1521, a Portuguese explorer named Ferdinand Magellan led the Spanish colonizers to the islands of the Philippines. From 1521 to 1565, the Spaniards tried to conquer the Philippines. For 44 years, Filipinos defended the Philippines from the colonizers. But the Spaniards introduced Catholicism, befriended and influenced the Filipinos. And that started the nightmare of the Filipinos under the Spanish tyranny. The Philippines were under the Spanish dictatorship for more than 300 years. For 200 years, Filipinos formed many revolutions against the colonizers. In the year 1898, the Spanish-American War started. The Filipinos used this chance to overpower the Spaniards to drive them away from the Philippines. As the war commenced, the Filipinos surrounded the Spaniards inside the wall of Intramuros without food and water. Because of their pride as one of the most powerful countries in the world, the Spaniards won't surrender to the Indios. May 1, 1898, the Spaniards and Americans planned a mock battle at Manila Bay. In this battle, after a few exchanges of gunshots, the Spaniards finally waved their white flags, surrendering themselves to the Americans. June 12, 1898, the Philippines was declared a free country, considering that this freedom was under the protection of the Americans. But what the Filipinos didn't know is that this so-called freedom was part of the plan of the Americans. December 10, 1898, Spain and America secretly signed a contract in which the Philippines was sold to America for $20 million. And thus, the Philippine-American War began, in which the Filipinos fought for 3 years. The Americans killed many Filipino people, including elders and children. They burned down villages, raped women, robbed houses, and tortured civilians. In the end, the Filipinos lost to the Americans, not only because of lack of manpower and weaponry, but also there are some of the Filipinos who sided with the Americans. Capitalism, the main reason why Americans advanced in the Philippines. Monopoly capitalist Americans needed the Philippines for 4 main reasons. 1. Natural resources or raw materials. 2. Market for the surplus products that cannot be sold anymore in America. 3. Lands that can be used for large capitals. And 4. Base for colonizing the Pacific and Asia. The Americans said that they aimed to give the Philippines a civilized government. They presented peace, autonomy, benevolent assimilation, and in every town they conquered, they immediately had elections. The Americans improved the economy of the Philippines by erecting buildings, factories, and conducting different road projects. But because of this, the natural resources of the Philippines is slowly deteriorating. It is true that the Americans improved the communication, transportation, and commerce in the Philippines because it is one of the conditions of the imperialist purpose. Even the campaign for health and cleanliness became a temptation on business, that if even 3 million of the Filipinos learn how to use toothpaste, the American businesses will earn tons of money in return. But what are the influences to the Filipinos brought by the American colonization in the field of education, politics, and culture? First, in education. Americans made use of the education and culture wisely to shape the minds of the Filipinos according to the imperialist purpose. English was made as a medium for teaching. Many English schools were established around the country. The enrollment of students in primary schools was compulsory, and to motivate the Filipino parents, the Americans distributed free books and school materials to the students who enrolled in the school. The first group of public teachers were the soldiers, and was soon replaced when the SS Thomas galleon came carrying the American teachers called the Thomasites. The Americans focused on teaching the Filipinos the democratic traditions and the applications of practical laws and principles, thus resulting in an increase of literacy rate among the Filipino people. They did not force the Filipino students to study about religion. Instead, they made it optional. Because there is a separation between the church and the state during the American colonization, the churches no longer have a hold on the Philippine education.
The Filipino revolutionary heroes were introduced as outlaws to avoid making them as an inspiration for children. America was introduced to the Filipinos as a paradise or a world of democracy and prosperity. Another good side to the American education is when Filipinos showed potential in learning. They were brought to the United States for advanced and additional studies, and they were called the pensionados. And when these people came back to the Philippines, they either taught in schools or served the government. Second, in politics. The Americans were the ones who taught the Filipinos about the elections. With this, the Filipinos were free to choose their leader. They also introduced the partisan politics to the Philippines. Partisan politics is a way of having different political parties during political elections, which is still evident during this generation. The first taste of politics from Filipinos was during the municipal elections. Because Filipinos were inexperienced and disoriented when it comes to understanding the modern politics, the Americans used this chance to assign their preferred officials to run for positions. Politicians rival their co-politicians for positions. Thus, corruption in the government is slowly emerging. In 1935, the Commonwealth Constitution was formed. This new government planned an ambitious outcome for the Philippines in preparation for an economic and political independence. Third, in culture. The Americans brought a lot of influences in Philippine culture, from the way the Filipinos eat, dress, and talk. Filipinos were dubbed as the Brown Americans. Modern offices, buildings, condominiums, food chains, and stores famous in America were also built in the Philippines. The Filipinos also favor their foods such as burgers, sandwiches, hot dogs, steaks, and that Americans made famous around the world until today. The colorful dresses, polos, coats, pants, hats, and shoes were the clothing introduced to us by the Americans. The Filipinos also played famous American games such as basketball and baseball. English. The language of the Americans is still being used by Filipinos everywhere. They use it to communicate with foreigners and to transact in businesses. The Americans introduced cars to the Filipinos, and the Americans showed many other advanced technologies to the Philippines, such as telephones, mobile phones, and television. In 1942, it was the end of the American colonization. But is it really the end? Up until this era, the influences of the Americans are still making an impact in the Philippines' culture. Yes, the Americans contributed a lot in making the Philippines better. But are all those influences for the good of the Philippines and the Filipino people? If yes, think again. Is colonial mentality a good quality for a Filipino like you? Like us? Most of the Filipinos today use English language in everyday conversation instead of using Filipino language. The English language became so popular in the Philippines that Filipinos use it as a way to indicate that they were more civilized. Teenagers are more inclined to pop rather than OPM, or original Philippine music. A lot of Filipinos also idolize American brands and designers. However, the Philippine brands are less becoming appreciated because of this. Yes, the Americans have made the Philippines a better country in terms of politics, education, and culture. They have taught us to be more civilized. But take a look around us. Can we really say that we are a free country?